Victor Alcoholic, and I'm alive and sober today by the very special grace of a loving God and the loving program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'd like to thank John for asking me to come out here and speak. And I want to thank Louisa for such a nice greeting. What a warm welcome. Made me feel at home in here right away. I'm going to try to get some of the numbers out of the way first. I'm 60 years old and I've been sober 14,165 days. And I like to say in days because it sounds like a lot. I guess it is a lot. I'm happy to say I'm sober 38 years and 9 months. And I got sober young. I got sober at 21 and I'm 60 now. And I've stayed sober the whole time. I haven't had to change my sobriety date. One of my pet peeves is when people have 20 minutes to talk, they spend 15 of those minutes on their drunkalog and 5 minutes on recovery and solution. And I think we all know how to fuck up and mess things up and get drunk and create chaos and disaster and destruction. I don't need any more education on that. Thank you very much. Yeah, I want to focus my talk mainly on recovery. My drinking career was very brief. It was between the ages of 16 to 21, and it landed me homeless. It landed me squatting in a boat in San Pedro, California, squatting in a boat in the cabin of a little shitty 25-foot boat. Not only was I homeless, but I also spent time twice locked up in a mental ward, the UCLA NPI, Neuropsychiatric Institute. And so after that, I was put in a halfway house in Redondo Beach or Torrance, California. And I still had the idea that I could control and enjoy my drinking. My friend Renee and I, we were on the back patio of this halfway house at midnight doing bong loads of Maui Paui and drinking Bacardi and rum. And the staff lady opened up the sliding glass door and there we were. You know, we had no kind of justification or no kind of rationalization. We were just busted. So they told me, if you want to stay here, you're going to have to go to a outpatient alcoholism program or we're going to kick you out. And having no place to go, I went to the outpatient alcoholism program. And what happened was one of the things they did was show us films about alcoholism and addiction. And one of the films, the alcoholic was in the background puking and the wife was on the phone making excuses to his boss. And I thought to myself, boy, these alcoholics have it bad. I'm so glad I'm not an alcoholic. And I went and bought a bottle to celebrate that I was not an alcoholic. I bought a bottle. And my last drink was at 1 a.m. in the morning in a construction site. I was drinking a 6-pack of beer, and it never occurred to me that social drinkers do not drink 6-packs alone at midnight in a construction site. The rehab sent me to Alcoholics Anonymous, and there were several things that I did. Like you ask, how did I come up with 38 years of sobriety? Well, I'll be glad to tell you. I came to meetings, and at first I went to a lot of meetings. I went to 180 meetings in 90 days. 2 meetings a day for the first 3 months. And then I went to a meeting a day afterwards for the balance of that year. I got a sponsor, and a sponsor is someone who is a mentor, a guide, a teacher, a confidant, and a friend, and most importantly, a friend. And I leaned on him pretty heavily my first year. The most important function of a sponsor is that he be someone who has read the book and taken the steps, who can help you read the book and take you through the steps. So I did that. I went through the steps with my sponsor. I read the big book, and the obsession to drink got removed. It's literally 37 years I've gone without the obsession to drink because God has removed that compulsion. He's removed that obsession. And I can be around alcohol now, like in a liquor store with hundreds of bottles around me, or at a party or a nightclub, and people are drinking around me, and I'm not tempted at all. I don't have the craving. I feel like I've been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. So I went to lots of meetings. I got a sponsor. I took the steps, and I learned to be of service. Now, some of you will relate to this. The first sentence in working with others is practical experience shows that nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. So this is practical experience. This is not some theory or something they heard or read in a book. The practical experience of the first 100 alcoholics to get sober, that nothing will so much ensure immunity to drinking. Well, that's pretty strong language. It's almost a guarantee, not quite, but almost. Nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. So I have worked intensively with other alcoholics. I've read through the book with them. When we got to a step in the book, they would take the step and we would read the book like it's a textbook, and it is a textbook. It's the textbook of our recovery program. The book says there's a simple plan outlined in this book. It says that further on, clear-cut directions are given as to how we recovered. So we take those clear-cut directions. We thoroughly follow the path. And so besides service, in addition to the service I do with other alcoholics, I've done most every kind of service that's available to AA. I've gone to H&I panels, which is hospital and institution panels, where people are in a prison or in a hospital and they can't get out to a meeting. We take a meeting into them. We're like Uber Eats, we deliver. And I've also set up the chairs in meetings, folded the chairs, put them away, worked the phones at Los Angeles Central Office. I brought the food, the coffee, and the literature to meetings. And I'm not bragging. I'm not saying how great I am. I'm saying this is the kind of service that has kept me sober. This has been a big aspect of my sobriety. And lastly, I went to a lot of meetings. I got a sponsor. I took the steps and I learned to be of service. And I became a student of that big book. I believe that the answers are in the book. Now, I'm not telling anyone else what to believe, but I believe that that book was divinely inspired, because how could it, from the big book and the 12 and 12, from two men, Bob and Bill, who first got sober, this thing has mushroomed into over 2 million alcoholics sober worldwide, not to mention all the other programs that have been sprouted from AA. There's like Cocaine Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous, on and on and on. I do believe that the book was inspired, and I study it as if my life depended on it. I'm going to share about recovery now, just to get the material stuff out of the way. I had no skills when I got sober at 21. My sponsor said, get a job. I said, but I don't have any marketable skills. He said, then go work at McDonald's. So I went and worked at McDonald's because I was willing to go to any lengths. And I took my sponsor's direction. GOD could stand for group of drunks, or it could stand for good orderly direction, or it could stand for gift of desperation. And I was gifted with the gift of desperation when I got here. I was willing to do all the things that were suggested of me. And I don't think I covered getting a higher power. When I first got a higher power, it was my sponsor. You know, he was 12 years sober at the time, and I had less than 30 days. And I felt, here's somebody stronger and smarter than me. I made him my higher power. Then after a period of time, I expanded my higher power to be the group, or AA as a whole became my higher power. And then gradually over a period of time, my higher power became this infinite and loving God. Oh, I was trying to say that I worked at McDonald's, and at 7 years sober, I went to college at night. I worked full time for an architect as a draftsman, and I went to college at night studying architecture at 7 years sober. By 10 years sober, I was riding the gravy train. I had designed 2 apartment buildings, 2 restaurants, about 30 dental offices, and about 40 seismic retrofits. So I became an architectural designer, which is not bad for a guy who had been homeless and took his first job in McDonald's. I don't want to dwell on that. I want to dwell on what I believe is the solution, what I believe is recovery. The first sentence of the 12 and 12 says, AA's 12 steps are a group of principles, spiritual in their nature, which, if practiced as a way of life, can expel the obsession to drink and enable the sufferer to become happily and usefully whole. So their group of principles, spiritual in their nature. Did you know that if you look in the 12 steps, alcohol is only mentioned once, but God or higher power is mentioned 6 times? It's a spiritual solution to a spiritual problem. It says in how it works that when we take care of the spiritual malady, we straighten out mentally and physically. So a group of principles, spiritual in their nature, which if practiced is a way of life. And it's not easy. It's simple, but not easy, because it's easy for 5 minutes or 20 minutes in an AA meeting to treat people with loving kindness. But then you go out in the world and there's a lot of difficult people out there. Let's face it, sometimes life sucks. And yet I have to learn to treat people with the same loving kindness I show to other alcoholics. I need to show that to my family, to my friends, to my clients, to people I meet in society. So that's my way of practicing these principles in my affairs. which, if practiced as a way of life, can expel the obsession to drink and enable the sufferer to become happily and usefully whole. Well, my obsession to drink has been removed, and I'm comfortable being around alcohol. These 12 steps can enable you to live comfortably without alcohol and enable the sufferer to become happily and usefully whole. I'm sometimes happily and usefully whole. It depends what day you catch me. Other times I'm a miserable, resentful, self-pitying son of a bitch. But I stay sober through those days too. My friend Ted used to say there's two types of days. There's living days and there's outlasting days. And I relate to that. Some days I just have to endure it until midnight. I especially like this part in the big book. This is on page 45. Lack of power, that was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously. But where and how were we to find this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. So that's quite a strong statement, because the program part of the book is 164 pages, and then there's 400 pages of personal stories. So what they're saying there is the main object of all 560 pages is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself. I got to tell you, fear is not a reliable higher power. Self-knowledge is not a reliable higher power. People are not reliable higher powers. It has to be something greater than you that you can tap into and rely on. Back on page 567 of the book, it says that with few exceptions, our members have tapped into an unsuspected inner resource, which they presently come to identify with their own conception of a power greater than themselves. Unsuspected inner resource. It also says in the book, we found a great reality within us. I'm going to share something that I think could actually save lives if you pay attention to this. Because I think what happens is newcomers come in here and they hear the meetings and they hear about recovery, but they don't take the steps. They don't get a sponsor or take the steps. They think the recovery is the fellowship, but it's not. Don't get me wrong. I get a lot of benefit from the fellowship. I get a lot of wisdom and insight and love and light from the fellowship, but it's not the program. The program is the 12 steps. And how do I know that? It says it right there in chapter 5, which we read. These are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery, So the 12 steps are the treatment for alcoholism. And I made up this metaphor, which I think describes it pretty nicely. And a few people have related to this. There's a man who is terminally ill. He has like a fatal malady, and he goes to the ER, to the emergency room, and he just sits in the waiting room. He doesn't actually go into the treatment room and see a doctor. He sits in the waiting room, and he's with other people who are there to recover. So they're talking about recovery. He's hearing about recovery, and people come out the door of the treatment room and they're healthier. He's even seeing recovery. So he's talking about recovery, listening to recovery, seeing recovery, yet he dies. Why? Because he did not take the treatment. And the 12 steps are the treatment for alcoholism. And I think what happens is people get confused and they think the fellowship is the treatment. No, this is not group therapy. This is God therapy. One other thing, which some people might find this controversial, but I don't want to enter into any debate. This is just my opinion, unless it's coming direct out of the book. I believe that sobriety is a grant, not a gift. And the reason I say this is if you're given a gift, you don't have to do anything to keep it. But a grant, you have to do certain things to keep it. If you're given a gift, it's unconditional. You just keep it and you do nothing. But a grant, for instance, here in Los Angeles, we have Cedars-Sinai Hospital, one of the finest hospitals in the country. And there's a big building that says Steven Spielberg Pediatric Research Center. In other words, he gave them a grant. In order to keep the grant, they have to study pediatric medicine. They have to do pediatric research. So if they stopped doing that and started doing geriatric research, they would lose their grant money. So I have to come up with a more elegant metaphor for that. But I think it makes sense that sobriety, there's certain things I need to do to keep my sobriety. And a lot of those are things I did my first year. I still read the big book. I still talk to my sponsor. I still try to practice the steps in my daily life. I still am of service. And I think the two main reasons people relapse, again, this is just my opinion, is that one, they don't take the steps, so they don't get the treatment for the disease. And two, if they take the steps, They do stop doing the things that work. And we all know what the things that work are. It's laid out clearly in the big book in the 12 and 12. Oh, there's this beautiful little phrase I'm going to share with you. I really enjoy it a lot. Dr. Carl Jung used to have a letter correspondence with Bill Wilson. Dr. Jung was a famous psychiatrist, and Bill Wilson was one of the founders of our program. And they wrote letters back and forth. And in one letter, Dr. Jung said to Bill, "Spiritus contra spiritum," which is loosely translated from the Latin, "the spirit overcomes the spirits." In other words, the spirit of your higher power overcomes the spirits of alcoholism and alcohol. So I love it because in 3 words, to me, it's a beautiful little phrase that sums up what we do here. There's another thing that I think a lot of people neglect to read is page 567 of the big book. It says in there that a spiritual experience or a spiritual awakening is a personality change sufficient to recover from the disease of alcoholism. A personality change sufficient to recover from the disease. So it demystified it for me. I didn't quite know what is a spiritual experience or spiritual awakening. It turns out spiritual awakening, spiritual experience, psychic change, and personality change are all synonymous. They mean the same thing. I want to share another thing, and I don't want this to sound like bragging. I want to make a point that my personality has changed. Over the last few months, I met a gal, Brittany, and she recently became homeless, and she was living in a motel, and she and her 2 young sons, and she got COVID, and her youngest son got COVID. And she just sent me an email today that she just made 9 months today, and I'm so proud of her. And so the dad of her children was a deadbeat and he's not paying her. So I've been sending her $50 a week for quite a few weeks. So it's added up to like $500. And I'm saying this is a different guy than the guy who came in 1983. The guy in 1983 only cared about himself and not much at that. So anyway, I've had a personality change. I'm able to see, do, and believe things that I could not do on my unaided resources. I want to share briefly a little bit about my life. I do web design work now. I'm dealing with a few ailments: alcoholism, bipolar, cancer, and diabetes. So I don't have it easy. I'm not saying any of you have it easy, but I know I have a hard life. But it doesn't prevent me from being happily and usefully whole. It doesn't prevent me from being of service and adding value to other people's lives. And the alcoholism is being treated by the practice of the steps in my life. The bipolar is being treated for 32 years with lithium. I'm dual diagnosis. I have cancer. I have chronic lymphocytic leukemia, and it's currently in remission. And I have diabetes. So I just want to let you know that life is not always wonderful and cheerful and fantastic. You know, I've gone through my share of suffering too. In this 12 and 12, it says, we never want to face the fact of suffering. Escape via the bottle was always our solution. And notice it doesn't say the probability or the possibility of suffering. It says the fact of suffering. Escape via the bottle is always our solution. What I have in this world, in this life, is friends, sponsor, higher power. The last thing I'll share is some of you have read this Hindu proverb, but for those who haven't, you're in for a treat. Look to this day, for it is life, the very life of life. In its brief course lie all the verities and realities of your existence, the bliss of growth, the glory of action, the splendor of beauty. For yesterday is but a dream, and tomorrow only a vision. But today, well lived, makes every yesterday a dream of happiness, and every tomorrow a vision of hope. Look well, therefore, to this day. Such is the salutation of the dawn. Thanks for letting me share. I'm grateful to be sober today. I'm grateful to be in this meeting. Victor, alcoholic.